Hello, finally.
Is my mic working? Yes, it is. Brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much for coming to Rough Trade East this afternoon. I'm Natasha Scharf, and I'd like to welcome Lord Tolhurst.
Hi, guys.
So, for those who don't know, Lol helped found The Cure with frontman Robert Smith in 1976, and he's played on the band's key albums as well. He left in 1989, but did briefly return to play on the Reflections tour in 2011, and today we're going to be chatting about Lol's memoir, which is called Cured, The Tale of Two Imaginary Boys. And there we are. And you can buy a copy of that later, and Lol will be signing it as well. We will do a little reading a little bit later on, but I thought we'll start with a few questions first of all. So I guess sort of the main thing here is that Cured is an account of your life, with emphasis obviously on the Cure as well. Why did you decide to write this as a memoir rather than autobiography?
Well, mainly I think there are a lot of Cure fans who could probably write a better autobiography, because that requires a lot of precision. And the thing about a memoir, as far as I'm aware, is it's really more of, you know, a story of how things felt, how things were, and that's really the thing that I wanted to describe, because that's the thing that people can't know. They can't know how that was. And the book is divided into 3 sections, and the first section is really the story of how we came to be the Cure. It's not a blow-by-blow account of every concert. It's how the Cure evolved out of how we were as people. And that was actually the most enjoyable part for me to write, because it was like reliving those memories, and it felt very good to do that. The second part is really the part that probably people out here know, and that was the most difficult part, because I can remember a lot of things. So there's a whole 40-year period in the book, so I can remember a lot of things, but to get them absolutely chronologically correct, required a lot of research, because you go from town to town to town to town, and it might have been 1981, it might have been 1984, so you have to kind of do some research, and so that's the part that's most like a sort of traditional sort of autobiography. And then the last part is really what happened after I left the Cure, and brings you up to pretty much almost last year, I think. So a memoir was really the best format.
And I guess there's a lot of people out there who probably don't know actually what did happen after you left the Cure, so it's fantastic to actually be able to read that.
Exactly.
And I was interested, what inspired you to actually take that approach with the 3 sections as they were? Because you'd done quite a lot of research reading other people's autobiographies and memoirs, hadn't you? Yeah,
I mean, I read probably nearly every music, autobiography, memoir that I could get my hands on. The ones that impress me the most are really the ones that are honest, because I realised very early on, if you're not prepared to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you're not really going to write a very interesting book. You're going to write a kind of advert for yourself, but you're not going to really write something that people can relate to. And one book, which might surprise people, but I found very good and sort of started me on the road and lots of things, was Duff McKagan's from Guns N' Roses, his book. And it was, I realised that was straight from the heart, and it felt right. So I contacted Duff and I asked him a lot of different questions about how he did things, and he was very forthcoming. So that was something that helped me a lot.
So you talk about the research that you actually did. What other research did you do? I mean, obviously you were looking up dates and things, but did you do any interviews with former members?
Not really, no. I mean, I've talked enough to everybody over my life. I don't need to interview anybody. I kind of know what they think about those things. It's funny, every time I meet Robert, we don't talk about the band, we talk about family, because I know his family very well and he knows my family very well, and that's all we talk about. So, to sit down and interview somebody, hey, what did you think about, that? No, that's not going to happen,
So just relying on your own memories of things.
Well, I've actually got the best memory out of everybody in the band. Yeah, because we would do tours in the early days, and Robert and Simon said to me, "What happened in Dusseldorf? Was that good? Did we have a good show?" And I somehow, I remember most of it.
Did you keep diaries at all?
No, not at all, not at all. I think the thing is, because back then, I was an existentialist, and I wasn't gonna record anything. I wasn't going to take any photos. I was going to live in the moment, which sounded like a very good idea at the time, but probably a bit stupid, But memories they're slippery things, but they're also, I believe, everything's here, and that was what was exciting about doing this, to excavate everything, and it becomes like dominoes, one after the other. Once you remember one thing, I'd wake up at 4 in.the morning. And I said to my wife, I'm sorry, I'm not going mad, but I'm going to have to mumble into the iPhone to record this, because otherwise I'll forget it. And that's how I did a lot of the book like that.
Were there any things that were particularly difficult to remember in terms of things that you'd deliberately buried in the past?
I think most people have got about 50% of their life that they want to deliberately bury. I don't think you can remain sane without doing a bit of that. But saying that, in all seriousness, a lot of what was brought up was quite hard for me, emotionally. But I'm glad I did it. It's definitely helped me write a better book, I feel.
And going back through the book, you obviously, the prologue, it starts, I love this, because you explain how you and Robert Smith were Crawley's first punks. So I'm curious, what actually attracted you to punk in the first place? Because people don't think of The Cure as a punk band.
Yeah, well, the thing was, you have to remember that the early 70s in England was not the wonderful time that the people that wanted to leave, Brexit and all that they remember. It was actually pretty dire. We had a 3-day week, all kinds of things, and the music scene wasn't that great either. It was like either disco or it was very overblown prog rock, and neither of which resonated with us much. And the other thing was, we couldn't see a way at how we could become musicians, because everybody seemed very much removed from us and our own experience. And then punk came along, and suddenly we saw a way out. We saw, like, hey, we can do that. That doesn't look that hard, and we liked the enthusiasm that people had about it. Every week there were new singles coming out, and there was like sort of fairly preposterous bands like Eater starting up, who were like 10 years old or something when they started. So we saw all these kind of things, and we thought, we can use that, we can use that energy.
So it was the attitude and the energy.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very interesting to read your memoir, because there are so many books about the London punk scene, but here you are talking about a punk scene that isn't London, it's just outside. Yeah, and we were
removed, but we were close enough to sense the energy, coming. Occasionally we come and see shows up here, but we were kind of allowed to develop in our own way, without the sort of the cut and thrust of like, oh, well, what's you have to say that a lot of it was very fashionable. So, what was fashionable this week might not be fashionable next week. Well, we bypassed all of that,
And you were going to read a little section from the
book
as well, which I guess kind of fits in quite neatly with that.
I think it should, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about... Tell me a little bit more about that, please. It's from chapter 4, isn't it, from the book?
Yeah. It's the chapter 4 is the Lost Boys of Suburbia. Basically, the bit I'll read describes how the summer of 1976 was a big turning point for us as The Cure. It was really where we started realising we could do something. And I have to give you a couple of notes about some names in here, because, yes, if I may. It's alright, we'll find it. We'll find it, it's in there somewhere. Okay.
That's the chapter.
Yeah, in this reading I'm going to refer to somebody called the Guru, who you might know. That's Robert's brother, but that's what we called him, the Guru. So that's who the Guru is in this bit. We were teenagers, just starting to consider life as adults. It was a summer I would never ever forget. For one thing, We finally had our own room to practice, despite the many attempts of the Smiths' neighbours to shut us down. One day the doorbell rang, and there stood a portly, red-faced, middle-aged man. "Your son and his friends are making that noise, yes?" "If you mean their band rehearsal, then yes, that's them," Robert's mother replied. "Well, whatever it's called, it's got to stop. They're disturbing the community. I can't hear myself think with that bloody racket going on." Rita considered this for about a millisecond. "Well, I'll tell them to stop playing when you tell your dog to stop pooing on my lawn." And with that, she firmly closed the door on the matter, and the Cure had in Rita Smith our first champion. Of course, the neighbour was quite right. We were disturbing the community, but that had been our intention all along. In the middle of that road-melting summer, Alex and Rita Smith decided to go on holiday, leaving Robert in charge of the house and environs. A little unwise on reflection. We were delighted by this development and immediately sprang into action. We knew exactly what was going to happen now. Band camp. College was on holiday and I had accrued a few days off from Hellerman, so with some careful planning, we could play at the house for at least a week. A week or more of non-stop bliss for us. Outside, the thermometer was creeping towards 90 degrees, an unheard of temperature in England. We had abandoned the stuffy annex to take up residence in the Smiths' dining room, because there was a smidgen of air blowing through the house that we could trap there and use to cool the practice sessions. Many cables snaked across the dining room floor as we wired up everything we owned to make as much noise as possible. Connecting all of our instruments together took a while, but the resulting cacophony was surely worth it. We had bought a green Roland Echo Box, which we could feed all the vocals through to give us what we thought was a very professional sound. The heat was intense, so I stripped my shorts and t-shirt for banging drums. We found the heat also required that we drink copious amounts of liquid to keep hydrated. Of course, this also meant we had to make frequent forays to the local pub during breaks in our band practice. The Grey Fox pub had an atmosphere familiar to any inhabitants of late 1970s England. Just having the temerity to walk into the pub was enough to enrage one of the local drunks. They were mostly bleary-eyed middle-aged men whose light had been extinguished years before, and now sought to intimidate and bully those who crossed their path. This usually meant anyone coming into the pub they didn't know personally. These guys didn't have a lot of friends. A loud, red-faced man playing harmonica very badly dropped the instrument from his lips as soon as we entered. He swiveled his head around and with one squinty eye scouted out anyone that might be offended by his ineptitude on the instrument. "What are you fucking looking at?" he slurred. Once he caught your gaze, he would violently hurl his glass on the ground, or, more spectacularly, at the mirrored back of the bar, and start to fight anyone who came into range. We steered clear. He was like a captive monkey, playing to the crowd that was entirely inside of his head. Yes, we had plenty of examples of the type of people we definitely didn't want to become in Crawley pubs in the summer of 1976. I walked across the carpeted room and out onto the patio beyond. It had been so hot for so long we had almost forgotten what England was normally like. This was a country woefully unprepared for a summer like the one of 1976. There was no air conditioning to speak of, and precious few ice-making facilities. We sweated it out night after night and day after day. The tar on the streets resembled a molten black river. Kids sneaked eggs out of the fridge to throw on the ground and watch them fry in the sun. We were gawky adolescents just getting used to our not quite adult bodies and minds, and like many teens, we were trying to find our way through a jungle of such conflicting information. We spent a long time that summer on the Smiths' patio looking out over the Guru's chickens clucking away at the back of the garden. Most of the time we played records from his collection outside on a little portable, from which we would glean various truths of rock and roll history and try on different styles. This was where certain elements of what was to become the Cure's signature sound came from, and some of it will surprise people. For instance, one LP on steady rotation that summer was Mahavishnu Orchestra's second album, Birds of Fire. Other contenders included Nils Lofgren's Cry Tough and the usual Brit rock stalwarts like Pink Floyd, the Beatles and the Stones. We all had our personal favourites. I recall Robert particularly liked Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask replica. We were devoted acolytes of much that had come before, plundering the Guru's precious back catalogue of rock and roll history. More than anything else, we were united in our general dislike of most of the overblown pap that masqueraded as progressive music, plus the fact it all seemed so far removed from our own experience growing up in Crawley. I couldn't imagine the Moody Blues having a running battle with racist skinheads in their hometown streets. Then again, they came from Birmingham, so who knows. As the Smiths' holiday wore on, we spent more and more time bashing out our sound in their dining room. I had the Pearl Maxwin kit, my first, and I loved it. Besides the aforementioned Marshall, Robert had added a brown Gibson Explorer guitar. A copy, I hasten to add, as none of us could afford the real thing at that point. British amplification and American guitar, the archetypal rock and roll setup. Michael completed his array with a brown Guild bass and Paul with his black Les Paul copy. We were ready to make a lot of noise, and we did. In between songs, we drank the Smiths' home brew and sometimes smoked gitans in their beautiful blue box. When hungry, a trip to the fish and chip shop sufficed. It was a beautiful time, without artifice or pretense. We were discovering our art. Life was very simple and pure. Robert and I got ready for rehearsal by sneaking into the Guru's room when he wasn't about and playing a couple of tracks. Robert was flipping through the albums on the shelf when he asked me if I'd heard Ray Charles' Hit the Road Jack. No, I don't think so. He put it on the Guru's expensive turntable. We listened intensely for a couple of minutes. Pretty bloody great, right? He grinned. Yes, it's brilliant, I agreed. We were in awe of the power of that piano riff. Total genius. Thank you. Because it just interfered with the flow, not because there were things that I didn't want to tell people. No, there's a million stories. But I didn't want to be like Bob Dylan with his chronicles. Write 10 books about the same thing. No, I mean I will write another book, but it might have some of the other stories in.
So watch this space.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah.
So did any of your former bandmates know that you were writing memoir?
Yeah, everybody knew, and I told Robert back in about 2013 or something, I think. Yeah.
Was anyone a bit worried?
I don't think so. I think they trust me enough to know that I'm trustworthy.
I really love the way that Robert is painted in the book. Particularly, he's so the way that he behaves as a teenager. He's very kind of like an old head on young shoulders. Particularly the way that after you left Hansa, he made sure that you still had the rights to the songs, and also he made sure that the first advance that you got was rationed out. You were paying yourselves a salary. It's such unusual behaviour when you consider that he was young at the time. You were all young. Yeah, we were all very young. I mean, we really sort of started doing all that stuff when we were about 15 or 16. The thing about Robert is, on one hand, he's the person that you think he might be from what you would see on stage and how but he's also a very pragmatic person, and that comes from his father. It's very like that, and he was just very logical about what we should do, and it seemed to be right. And it's certainly the right decision.
Well, yeah, it saved me a lot of heartache through the years. That's for sure. Yeah.
And of course, the big connection with this particular book is Pearl Thompson, formerly known as Paul Thompson, who designed the cover art. Yeah, right. He did all the cover art and all the stuff inside and stuff. Yeah. And it's the first sort of Cure-related thing that he's done for a while, isn't it? Well, yeah. I mean, he was. I'm not going to spoil it because there's a bit about the book in it. In the book. So I won't say any more. But you'll find out when you read the book. And I think it's testament to the Cure's innovative sound and style that they still continue to inspire 40 years on. Does it surprise you that legacy is still going? The me now sitting in front of you, no it doesn't. The me that was 16 years old would have been completely and utterly amazed, yeah. I'm very... When I think about that, I'm humbled and I'm flattered at the same time, Thank you. And if anybody's got any questions that you'd like to ask, I've got to keep an eye out for questions. Anybody? Okay, I shall ask one of my own then. You've played both drums and keyboards, and I wondered which one do you prefer? I like the physicality of drums, and drums are
You know, you can make like a sort of mantra out of it. It's like dancing. You know, if you do it right, it's really rewarding, and if you do it badly, it can be very exhausting. So, but I always like that. You know, the things really I'm interested in is sounds. You know, so keyboards have access to all of the sounds in the world, and I was very interested in that, and still am. But it's two different sides. You know, it's like sacred and profound. You know, it's something that takes us out of being who we are, and that really is what I'm always after. That's what I was after with the book. The book took me out of being me here now, you know, it took me into a different world, and for that, you know, it was a different kind of vehicle, but it's the same thing. They're all the same thing, really.
Okay, any questions? Yes?
I would like to ask you a question about how, at the beginning of The Cure, you felt about bad criticism. There is something which everybody knows about the John Peel session, where you had the song Desperate Journalist, where it was a critique of the album of The Cure. How was it for you that people might not like what you were doing?
Well, that's actually a very good question. I think it would be worse nowadays because you have the internet, you know, and there's room for people to just, you know, run around and say whatever they like about everybody and have no consequences for it. You know, back in the days, you know, if somebody would come and tell us what they thought about us, well, if it was good and it was nice, yeah, we you know, that would be a pleasant experience. And if they weren't so nice to us, it might be a very unpleasant experience for them, depending on how we felt. But no, we were always very nice to people, even the bastards. Yeah, you know, it of course it affects you because it's a comment about you from somebody you don't know. It's kind of like having a thief come in your house and steal something. But I say that over the years you get to have not a thick skin, but you get to be able to mediate that and realise, well, it's not really about you, it's more about them. You know, does that make sense? It's more about how they feel about things, which is fine, they can feel like that, but I don't have to feel like that, so yeah.
Anybody else, any questions? Really?
No.
Oh,
there we
yes,
go.
a lady?
Yeah.
Yes, what type of musical bands do you listen to at the moment? What do you particularly like? Something that came out recently?
Well, yeah, I listen to all kinds of things. Mostly I listen to stuff that I have a son. My son's 24, and he's a musician as well. And he has his finger on the pulse of what's going on, because, you know, a lot of people my age will turn around and say, oh, you know, music, it's not as good now as it used to be, and I always tell them, no, that's not true. All that's happened is you don't know where to find it anymore. You know, you've forgotten how you found music, and so I rely on my son, and he you know, pops things into me. There was something I liked recently. It was Electronica, Caribou. You've heard them, right? Yeah, and that was very good. I mean, I listen to lots of different things. I listen to some old stuff as well, you know, and I read a lot, though. That's what I do a lot.
What have you been reading recently, apart from memoirs and autobiographies?
Not much else besides those, actually. I mean, there's lots of... Viv Albertine's book I thought was particularly brilliant and good, and I really enjoyed that. Didn't enjoy Pete Townsend so much, but I enjoyed Viv Albertine's.
Any other questions? Yes?
I guess going with that, and I've already read a bit of the book, and I listened to Black Sabbath yesterday, and you say at one point, you know, people said, you played Black Sabbath and you didn't really know, but actually this kind of dark sound, which kind of happened just before punk and The Cure in
Right.
England, in Birmingham.
Right.
Was that something that influenced The Cure at all, or did you say no, nothing to do with heavy metal?
No. Well, I could tell you something that's it's not in the book, but that's a truth. When we were at school, you know, 13, 14, I was like the unofficial DJ at lunchtime, right? And I can remember playing the first Sabbath album. So obviously, there's some stuff, and you know, they're for me, I'm a purist really in that way. I like the people that did it first every time. That's you know, if I was going to wear, well, I'm not actually wearing Levi's. I was going to say that if I was going to wear jeans, I would wear Levi's, but I'm not. But So that puts light to that, right? But music like that, you know, anything that's been around for a time or has affected a lot of people, you have to be affected by it, you have to like. I mean, you know, me and my wife, we went to see the Beach Boys the other day. I had never seen them, and they were great. You know every single song they've ever done as well, you know, for 3 hours. But, you know, it's not what I listen to on a daily basis, but all kinds of people like that. And I started to do a lot of that with my son as he was growing up. I started to take him to see people that I thought, you know, I said, you better come and see them now because they might be dead or not touring, you know. So I said, you're going to find them sooner or later, but let's go and see them now. So I took him to see Kraftwerk, I took him to see Terry Riley and, you know, all kinds of things. So, yeah, you're right. There's some influences, but it wasn't a question of us throwing that. We were more throwing away things like the Moody Blues. Really, that's what we were throwing away. Yeah, look, Sabbath still going right on.